prepared some questions in advance for each of the panelists. That is a specific question for each of them separately. And then we're going to open it up for general questions, as you heard before. So I'm going to begin with Esra. So we're living in a time of resurging inequality, especially where gender and race are considered, following decades of progress. Esra, what do you see as some of the challenges and solutions from your own work on a local and global level?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Resurgence is an interesting word. It's always been in existence, but definitely we're seeing a resurgence of inequalities. Oh, can you hear me now? Sorry. Okay, there we go. Yes, we're definitely seeing a resurgence of inequality, both locally and globally. Locally, we can see with the rise in the alt-right, with financial and economic insecurities that disproportionately target marginalized and racialized communities. Globally, we can see that there's also an increase in conflict and humanitarian crises and displacement, again, disproportionately impacting the global south and racialized and marginalized communities. Now, a lot of the challenges, now there's quite a few, but I'm gonna stick it down to specifically like institutions like the UN, looking at governments, and yeah, other stakeholders and how do they address these challenges and issues. A lot of time, there's been the challenges with policy and policy implementation. I mentioned earlier that the issue is that these don't exist, the solutions don't exist. The solutions are there, but it's the implementation that we're struggling with. So what we are noticing is that we're not addressing the root cause of a lot of these issues. And these root causes actually stem from colonial legacies and historical legacies that continue to destabilize a lot of these regions, that continue to perpetuate a lot of the conflicts that we see today. If we're not addressing these systemic roots, we cannot find solutions to the current issues and crises around the world. Another issue that I've noticed in my work is that we're not valuing all lives the same. And we can see this with different conflicts around the world. For example, Ukraine and Russia and Palestine, Israel. A lot of my work, I've been challenging just recently the Canadian government's approach to foreign policy, whereas they're not valuing all lives the same. The narrative around Israel-Palestine is not the same narrative around Ukraine and Israel. Why are we condemning Russia and encouraging the disarmament of Russia, but not doing the same for Israel? Why is Canada taking a reactive approach to conflict and not a proactive approach and addressing the Israel-Palestine issue as an issue of colonialism and apartheid? So I think these are kind of the issues that I'm really struggling with, and the solutions to this kind of stuff is, one, addressing the colonial, systemic, and historical legacies, valuing all lives the same, and then I would say, lastly, the last solution is that building better connections between policy and policy implementation. And how do we do that? It's, of course, by, not seeing representation as this thing of visibility. It's more than just visibility. Representation isn't enough. Are we empowering these communities? Are we valuing these communities? Are we really taking what they say and implementing that? Are we getting out of these Western frameworks and adopting other beliefs and belief systems? And I think through that, intersectional, decolonial lens, will we find innovative solutions to pressing issues? And I will stop. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much.
Don't apologize. No, that private conversation here, we're going to leave it open, and we're going to move on to Bita. So Bita, financing gaps remain as big barriers to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly in the context of climate action. Bita, from your experience, what do you see as the most promising, innovative mechanisms to deliver both environmental and social impact?
Thanks, Sam. There's a lot there, so I'm going to try to pack it all in. I want to start by saying finance is not just about numbers, it's about values. And it's about what kind of a world do we want to invest in, and then how do we restructure our current models so that we're in alignment with those goals. And so I know we have a diverse audience here, so I just want to take a step back and talk about why we have this financing gap and why it's important. So this year in July, UN leaders met in Spain for the 4th International Conference on Financing Development. And there was an acknowledgement that we are behind on the Sustainable Development Goals, and we are not on track to meeting the 2030 agenda. So to put it in context, to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, we have an annual financing gap of about $4 trillion. Annual global output is over $105 trillion. Yet we can't find the $4 trillion needed to pull nations out of poverty, to put girls in school, to get healthcare to those who need it, to develop and advance communities. So what this signals to me is that this is not a conversation about a lack of resources or a lack of capacity. We have the resources we need. It's an issue of will, in my opinion, collective will, political will, and it links back to what do we value and what are we willing to pay for. And so in the context of climate action, we know that certain regions and certain populations are disproportionately impacted by the effects of climate change. And the global financial system makes borrowing incredibly costly for a lot of these poor regions. And they're the ones that need the financing the most. So when you look at the global financial system, we need to fundamentally restructure how we're getting capital to those who really need it. So the bad news is that we're not on track to meeting the goals. The good news is that there's a lot of work being done in this space, and it's a relatively new space, so if any of you are interested, I'm happy to have a conversation because it is an all-hands-on-deck approach to solving this. Some of the mechanisms that are really promising that we're looking at now in industry are blended finance models, so philanthropic and public funds being combined to de-risk private investments, having more outcome-based metrics in place, having public disclosures, which I think we should go even a step further. I think companies should all publicly disclose their metrics, the impact they're having, their bottom line, so that we're able to really see who's part of the solution and who's still part of the problem so we can restructure things. But the mechanism that I'm most excited about is actually not a financial tool or metric. It's cross-sector social partnerships. And we talk about that a lot, but being able to really effectively do it is an incredibly hard thing because getting academia, government, private industry, nonprofits in the same room and having them be able to mediate, negotiate value, and then translate that value into outcomes is not an easy task because there's different logics, there's different agendas at play. So that's what I think about a lot now is how do we get these different actors in a room and make sure that the outcomes are significant. And I think there's a lot of potential and promise there because when you get these people in a room, the thinking is no longer how do we finance projects, it's now how do we finance change and systemic impact, which is a huge difference. And so last thing I just want to say, I really want to emphasize that the private sector wants to be part of the solution. When I was working in government, we had companies come up to us all the time and say, we're working on the energy file. And they would say, we want to have sustainable business models. We want to be part of a just transition, but we don't know how. We've never done this before, this is new. And so they need a blueprint, and that's where the partnerships come in. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for business and government to work together to solve some of these big issues.
For Kenisha, in many parts of the world, we're witnessing a troubling regression in healthcare. theme here. Regression. Oh, sorry. Let me repeat that. In many parts of the world, we're witnessing a troubling regression in healthcare, particularly in women's health. From withdrawals from global health institutions like the World Health Organization, to cuts in research funding, and reduced access to health education and services, the setbacks are significant. What are the broader implications of these trends, and how can education be leveraged as a tool to address and reverse them?
Thank you so much. That question is really important societally to ask. And if we look at the systems around us and how they've been built, even in the UN, we see how there are multiple organizations that are tasked for each of the SDGs. Education is a separate organization. The World Health Organization is separate from education. And then within the World Health Organization, you'll have a small committee working on women's health. So the reality is that women's health has always been underfunded, under-discussed, and never prioritized. Now, why is that so harmful? We might think it's probably just half of one of the SDGs, but that in fact is not true. Because when women don't get the health care that they need, in fact, families don't get the health they need. Because women in many cultures, many societies, including ones in Canada, are the center structure of a family's health. They are the pillar. When your mother is educated, you educate a mother, you educate the child. And they actually inform a lot of the eating practices that also go on in our households. So there are so many levels that we need to think about when we are not funding women's health, because it's not only the health that is impacted, it is education attainment, it is societal functioning, societal gatherings, societal cohesion, peace, the economies, the way businesses work, and that is something that we should all be scared about. Because when we work in silos, we are not able to see the implications, the repercussions. But when we see that women's health is actually part of all of the SDGs, and when you empower women to make healthier choices, you're empowering a larger community, then we can shift the dialogue from should we invest in women's health to how can we strengthen our investments. The second part I'd like to bring up is around education. Now, why is education a tool for change? I firmly believe that it is the foundation of change. In fact, when you educate someone, you equip them with tools and skills to show up better for themselves, for their families, and again, the societies at large. So I see, even in my own journey, when I was faced with the obstacle of putting forth that motion to be successfully adopted for free menstrual hygiene products, the way that I was able to move the dialogue from, oh, that's a lot of money to invest in, to how can we find the resources, pool the resources, because this is something we believe in, is through education. By educating your colleagues about the importance and realities and implications of the decision you want to make, you can move the needle forward. And whether it is someone in Liberia, where we are also having our chapter for the Hope Collective being functioning, you can see that in these communities, sometimes families have to choose between sending their sons or women or their girls in the family to school. And many of those times, you will see that the boys are actually sent and women are held behind. You will also see in health how there's so many women who have not been included in research. Their autonomy, their bodily functions, their physiology is not well understood when it comes to drug interactions. And that is going to cause later burdens on our healthcare system. So there are a lot of components when we talk about women's health. It's not only this small category. In fact, we should not only have it be a part of one organization, it is our collective responsibility, whether you're coming at it from a corporate sector to ensure employee well-being, or you're coming at it from a social sector. So I think the questions really need to shift from whether we should invest to how we can come together to make this a priority in every sector. Thank you.
All right, finally, question for Max. Max, we often hear that young people are agents of change. But what does that really look like in practice? And would you actually prefer a different way of phrasing things, I might ask? How can youth-led efforts genuinely shape the future of the UN and global progress? And And for someone just starting out, what are some real practical steps to make an impact? I know you've already addressed part of that question, but I think it'll help to go back to those practical steps as we close this part.
As you heard my cheat sheet, that would be the first way, everything that I ran through in 5 seconds. I do not like Agents of Change as a title or anything like that, because I've found, especially in the international space and multilateral fora, and this is to all of your points, we're having the same discussions over and over. It's been vicious cycles, and you go to different conferences, different delegations, different meetings, and what you're seeing is a bunch of hot air, speeches full of platitudes, normative ideals. I completely reject when we as young people step into any space and we are told by a member delegation, by somebody leading a UN agency, well, it would be really great to have gender equality. We should do that. We should do more of that. We should really do this and that, and we need to do this, and blah, 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 blah. It's infuriating, because we all know that. We don't need more information. Matter of fact, a few years ago, the UN undertook a research study of how many policy papers they've written, how many they've published, and they realized that there's such a dearth of publications that it stifles its very operation, which means that the UN has now, unfortunately, succumbed to being an organization of research and output, and not so much so peddling change. It's very good to peddle change when it's very palatable for all member states. It's less so when there isn't incentives, especially financial incentives, or socio-political issues that stand in the way of that, which tends to happen to be most of the most controversial and difficult issues. And those, unfortunately, affect us, because everything that's been done now in our name has not been done in our name. We have to answer to everything that our predecessors have done, and we have to accept this world of ours. And when they talk about intergenerational equity and inclusion, that does not mean you put me in a table, sitting in front of all of you, give me 30 seconds to say what I need to say, and then ignore me for the rest of the time. That's not sufficient. So my point being is that when you're involved in anything, it's no longer an Agents of Change question. It's, we're coming into the room, and we are refusing to budge. This is no longer, oh, where are you open to a negotiation? Where is this nice for you? Because unfortunately, the way that the UN functions, especially with its veto power, it's very difficult to find consensus. So you come into a room, how about we come into a room, instead of decorum and protocol, and we both say what we find palatable, acceptable, and incentivizing, and then come to a compromise. COP30 is coming up. This is going to be the exact same thing that has happened for the past 5 years. We haven't closed any of the gaps that have been present for millennia. And it's infuriating if you're young people and you're like, okay, well, I'm sorry, I've been involved in this process for at least 5 or 6 years. Nothing has changed in 5 or 6 years. So what's going to change in 10 years? What's going to change in 11, 12, 13, 20, 30? And my practical tips to get engaged, you saw them. That's where you get your voice heard. However, when you have that platform, it depends how you're going to use it. There is an element of the UN where you have to play the system. You have to get into it. That's how a lot of people try to do it, is they try to gain enough access and enough expertise and impact so that they're able to leverage it and then push change. It's very easy, however, that when you're in that system to become a part of it. And then you become very comfortable in your benefits, especially if you're tenured or staff, or you just accept status quo. And then all of a sudden, you really have this cognitive dissonance of, when did all of my passion, where did it go? How did I become just so idle and so complacent with everything? So it's very important that when you're stepping into that space, you step in it with the conviction that you wanted to at the very beginning, and you don't let that go, you don't let that die. And sometimes you will have to swallow your pride in certain things and, you know, absorb what people are saying to you, especially if it's difficult to hear, because compromise, peace, effort, all of this comes with very, very difficult conversations, especially if a state is autocratic or does not care of what you have to say. What I find is especially difficult is you'll find a lot of young people, primarily in CSOs, NGOs, come to these forums. They are coming with open hearts. They're really coming with their heart on their sleeve. They really want to say what their interests are, where they're lobbying. They're not trying to be secretive unless they're trying to get money for some sort of grant or something. And unfortunately, the member states do not come all the time like that. I'm not going to speak for all. There's certainly a coalition of the willing that really, really love young people, engage them completely, are for it. Those do not tend to be the states that you're thinking of. And unfortunately, when you come to those spaces, You have to play the system so that eventually you have enough to leverage where you can kind of swoop in and make your impact. Sometimes that impact is more covert, sometimes it's more overt. Sometimes if you're lucky enough, you find the middle ground and a balance, and you're able to find something that's incentivizing to member states yourself, your interests. Like I'll give you an example. We were recently in that PACT working group. We had to develop principles for youth inclusion with member states. I'm not going to name ones, and I do not speak on behalf of the UN when I say this, but some member states were very vehemently opposed to basic fundamentals of inclusion, like disability, social and gender equity, things of that nature. And when you're sitting there, not from a human rights perspective, but from a humanistic perspective, and you're like, what am I doing if you're all just going to ignore it anyways? You start to question what you're trying to do. However, you realize that if you can whittle the words in a specific way and give instructions in a different toolkit and leverage that coalition of the willing to try to keep making that work happen, then at least it'll happen in some segment as opposed to none at all. And I'm a pragmatist by nature. I'm a cynic with the system, as you can hear, but I'm a pragmatist. So for me, I will take the half that I'm getting as opposed to nothing. And sometimes you have to work with those states. However, and as I say, the very strong message, do not apologize for it. And like I said before, don't quit. You're not allowed to stop. That's it.
Submitting the questions on Slido. There's a lot of great questions there. A lot of them are also very specific to a speaker. So I'm gonna let you take the initiative to go up to the speaker. They're all very friendly. But I'll give one question to all of the panelists here. You have one sentence to answer with, okay? So the question was, if you were to start what you did, what would you do differently considering the current economic and political climate? So we've heard your story and experiences, how you got to where you are today. But if you were to start today, what would you do differently? One sentence.
I think something I would have done differently is I think I would have gotten involved and reached out to like-minded people earlier. I think I approached these topics very individually. I think I had a lot of fear. I didn't know if people would accept me, people viewed the same things as me. I also wanted to go into international development and diplomacy, but I knew I was a little bit embarrassed by having a literature background. I didn't know if that could be a thing that would be a deterrent. So I think for me, had I gone back, I would have been more courageous to reach out to people and to not be afraid to collaborate. And because I found through collaboration, really that's when things started moving for me. And in fact, it actually gave me more motivation and passion to continue doing this work. And not only that, but it also educated me more. I think I learned so much through collaboration and through just communal efforts. I really regret not doing that earlier. So if I can give anyone a piece of advice, I would be, I would tell you, don't be afraid to reach out to different organizations, to different people. Apply. I told you, I was told not to go into university. I actually didn't even want to apply to U of T because I didn't think I was going to get in. Everything was really rooted in fear and shame and guilt, and I think that's really amplified when you're a woman and when you're a woman of color. So I think just go at it, and yeah, I think it's really cliche, but yeah, I think I would say, yeah, just jump the gun and do it. So I don't know if anyone else has something.
I think my one sentence would be take up space. Take up space.
Yeah.
You belong in all rooms where decisions are being made. You have the skill set, you have the lived experiences, you have a story that should be shared, and especially to the women out there, take your space. You don't need to wait for the perfect conditions. You don't need to wait for the perfect right opportunity to land in front of you. My favorite quote by Zig Ziglar is, you don't need to be great to start, but you need to start to be great. So you can start today, take up your space, and
That's a beautiful quote. That's really inspiring. A motto that I go by in life now is to listen, learn, and lead. And and I recommend that to everyone. I call them the 3 L's. And, well, I guess L's are a negative connotation in amongst the generation, but I think you can use 3 L's to make a W, maybe. I would say that the biggest thing I've learned throughout my journey is being intentional, learning how to show up, and what sphere of influence you can operate in. We had great panelists here who will tell you the same. We all work in different sectors, but we all equally contribute to the progression of society. So find what makes you feel, what you're passionate about, but don't leave this room feeling inspired. Leave this room with implementation. Leave with an implementation date. Maybe find people around you that you don't already know. Work with them and say, in 30 days, we will have started something. You don't have to know what it is, but you do have to maybe have it within you to take this moment that you're feeling, this inspiration that you're feeling, and turn it into action. And that starts with listening, learning, and leading.
I would say a few years ago, I was sitting talking to my professor, and I'm like, because he worked at the UN, I'm like, how do you get into this? I keep applying, nothing's happening, what do I do now? And he called me out and he said something that changed my mindset completely. He said, why do you keep waiting to get permission from people to do things? Just go do them. You don't need it. Especially not in the system that we've designed now. You want to make impact, go lead it. You want to run an event, you don't need to get the stamp of approval from a government or an agency. Go do it. Those people that want or find that interesting will come to you, and then eventually your impact scales over time. And I mean, he was right. I started expanding myself, and it opened up so many doors for me. And at that time, all I could think of was of this traditional, very capitalist Western mindset of you go to school, you apply to a job, that's your only entry point, that's your only impact. And it's worse because if it's bureaucratic or hierarchical, you start at the very bottom, so you can't make any impact. And when he asked me something, he would tell me, but you could just go do it on your own. Obviously, it's your time, you're essentially volunteering, it's not paid, it's not perhaps financially incentivizing, but if you care about it, then you can certainly do it, so go do it.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for the summer task force at UNAC Hamilton branch that made this event possible, organizing everything. And thank you all, the audience here, for being super engaged and staying till the end, even though we did run out of time. Now I'm going to open the floor to networking. Please be courageous enough to come to the speakers. They're very friendly. If you would like to stay connected to our branch, we do have some social media links on the screen here. And also if you're interested in volunteering for our branch, please come speak with me or Anne, and we'd love to have that discussion.